Welcome to the final episodes of History Bites in 2022. My name is Dawn Owen, and I am the curator at Guelph Museums. History Bites is a 1 hour long casual conversation during which we chat about the latest news, exhibitions, and other happenings at Guelph Museums. History Bites airs on Guelph Museum socials every month. A recording of today's program will be available through the Museum Everywhere portal on our website and on our socials after the broadcast. Before I introduce and welcome our guests, I'd like to focus our thoughts within an awareness and acknowledgement of the land. Guelph is located on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe peoples, specifically the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The place we now call Guelph is on land that is described in the Between the Lakes Purchase, No. 3 Treaty of 1792, an agreement between the Mississaugas of the Credit and the British Crown concerning over 3 million acres of land between Lakes Huron, Ontario, and Erie. Today, Guelph is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Guelph Museums commits to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and to doing more to learn, share, and support truth and healing. When we gather, we spend time in conversation about the land, its history, and its peoples. We grow our knowledge and relationships with our treaty partner, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and with the many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who call Guelph home. This informs all that we do at the museum and underscores our commitment to each other today and for the health and well-being of future generations. Today's History Bites is focused on the exhibition Guelph Pipe Band Celebrating 100 Years, which opened at the Guelph Civic Museum on August 9th and continues until January 15th. We recorded this conversation over 2 days with multiple members of the Guelph Pipe Band community. On November 26th, I sat down with Andy Donachie, John Bridge, Bruce Anderson, and Tyler Bridge at McRae House. Then on December 6th, I connected with Jim McGilvray, Larry Willis, Marilyn Willis, and Ellen Mole over Zoom. These folks hold a lot of the band's history in their hearts and minds. So thanks for joining us as we trace the origins and share the stories of the Guelph Pipe Band, past and present. Part 1 of our conversation will begin shortly. But first, let's listen to the Guelph Pipe Band's Centenary March. Welcome, Andy, Bruce, and John.
Thank you for having us, John.
Our pleasure.
I'm also delighted to introduce my co-conspirator in this conversation, Pipe Major Tyler Bridge.
Good morning.
Morning. Tyler and his dad, John, along with some other members of the band, and I do want to shout out Aidan Marr, who was instrumental in creating the idea and the inspiration for the exhibition itself. Were instrumental in shaping the project and sourcing artifacts for display. We discovered along the way that some details of the pipe band's history had been lost or confused over the long lens of time. So in today's conversation, we're going to set the record straight, or try
We're
to.
attempting to set the record straight.
We'll attempt to set the record straight. So welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So the creation of the Guelph Pipe Band was inspired by the Guelph Burns Club, which celebrated poet Robbie Burns in the local Scottish diaspora. To fund the band, a Tag Day campaign raised $72,
And the Victoria Guelph chapter of the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire collected $500. The Guelph Pipe Band was originally formed in the fall of 1922, was active for some time after that, and during the Second World War, members of the band served with the Highland Light Infantry, and Pipe Major Art Korstefin led the Canadian bands as they marched into Berlin in 1945, so a pretty esteemed start to the Guelph Pipe Band's history.
Yes. Gerstorfen.
Korstdorfen.
Yes.
Thank you. So what does the early history of the Guelph Pipe Band mean to the pipers and drummers who perform with the band today?
I think it has a big significance to the three of us just because of our age. But the players that are in the band today, they see remembrance services with the Legion and they see decoration days with the Legion. Mm-hmm. And then from the likes of us, we instill that what the band had done in the past and where the band came from. They're in the band to play pipes and drums and compete and do things. But we're not going to ever get away from the significance of Remembrance Day and the Decorations Day that we do for the Legion. Yeah. And there's a Second World War significance there as well. Mm-hmm. And some of us have grandparents that served in the First World War as well.
I have,
yeah.
Yep.
Andy, did you want to offer your thoughts?
Well, I was born in 1938, and that was the year before the war. And I actually remember some of the blackouts and all the stuff in Britain and in Scotland and Edinburgh and Roslin, where I was born. And I grew up through that age, and then I left there. The war was finished, of course, in 45. I left there in 1956. I was 17 and a half, and I came to Guelph. I've been in Guelph 65 years.
So how quickly did you join the band then on your arrival?
I arrived in March 1956, the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day.
Yep.
And I joined the band in June. I was walking down the street in Guelph, and I heard the band playing. And I walked over to the armories. Bob Whittle was the pipe major. I asked Bob Whittle, I said, could I have a go? He said, yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. I says, what do you want to play? I said, do you know Australian Ladies? Yeah. Okay, we played Australian Ladies. I finished. I went home. He came to my house that week, and he had a uniform, a drum for me to play.
And you came complete with a Scottish accent.
And I had the accent, yeah. And I ended up a lead drummer, and that was it for quite a few years, yeah.
I'm curious from you, Bruce, just about your ideas in the context of the history of the band and what it means to you or meant to you as a player, what it means to the band today.
Well, when I joined the band, it was more as a musical enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I joined because at the time Ed Nye was one of the best instructors in Canada. After I was in the band for a while and meeting all the people that were players in the past and lived through the war years, and the affiliation of the band with the Legion brought more to mind the actual military and respectful part of the band to mind.
Mm-hmm. That maybe you were part of a legacy.
Yes.
You could
exactly.
sense the legacy of the band.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That there was a history definitely behind the band that you
Mm-hmm.
felt because of their past experience in the war, especially the stories. Well, not so much the war stories because they didn't speak of it much, but the fact that Doug Lee, Bob Whittle were veterans.
Yeah.
Bob Whittle's wife was a veteran.
Yeah.
And these people had been through it.
So that military history was definitely not so much a history for those folks.
Yeah,
it was a lived experience.
Not through the band so much. I didn't perceive it in the band. I perceived it in the members that were members of the band at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, our organizations are really led and driven by the people who are at the heart of those organizations.
Yes,
right?
and a lot of it as well with all the functions that we played for the Legion.
Yeah.
And later in my career in the band with the McRae House.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
there was the exposure to the legacy there.
Absolutely. So how about you, Tyler, as a current pipe major and with your own long history, as it were, with the Guelph Pipe Band, what are your thoughts in the context of sort of that early history and how it registers for maybe some of the younger members of the band today? What is the sense of that history?
I think much like Bruce mentioned, I think it's still very much the same where, when I joined the band as a kid, you feel like you're part of something that's been around for a long time. Obviously, my dad being in the band, I grew up around the band, so it was kind of something that I wanted to do, and then when I had that opportunity to join it, it was really exciting. I think I'm seeing a lot of the younger members coming into the band, and even established players that are joining this particular band for the first time but have played in other bands are coming in and learning that there is a large portion of the band's identity that is linked to the fact that it's been around for 100 years. And there's a connection to, military service, but I think also just a connection to community service as well. So, the band having started in 1922 and would be a part of many different community events and out playing in public. And like Andy mentioned how he discovered the band, he heard them playing on the street and just walked over. And so I think that's still, I think it's remarkable that kind of thing is still ongoing and that we're still kind of out in the public performing, doing things like here at McCrae House in the gardens, and still having people kind of walk up to us off the street and like, oh, I used to play in this band, and I'm looking for a new band, and so I'm seeing a lot of new members coming in and very quickly, I guess, sort of being indoctrinated a little bit with the history of the band, and I think it kind of sets us apart a little bit from a lot of organizations in Ontario, that we've been around for 100 years, and then also that we've been able to continue making music in the public eye for that entire time as well. So I think that's important to recognize, and it's something that new members find out very quickly when they join, just by talking to other people and just the number of community events that we do on top of competing. So
absolutely.
Everybody loves the bagpipes.
Well, there is something sort of, as someone who isn't a musician, when I hear the pipes and drums, it hits me almost in the heart. You can hear them at a distance, and I guess that's part of that sort of probably that military component in its earliest origin, right? You wanted to hear the pipes coming, I would think, at least as lore goes, right? As a signal of action.
Military component and uniformity goes into our police department and our fire department, and not just when a soldier comes back deceased from overseas, there's bagpipes. Whenever there's a ceremony for someone that's passed,
any ceremony
for our police forces, and
first thing you hear is
it's on the news. There's either a piper or an entire pipe band.
Yeah,
it's part of it without fail.
There's something that reaches from that historical place into sort of the hearts and minds of folks as they're sort of preparing themselves for whatever that event is, whether it's a somber event, a funeral, a passing, something, seated in an event that sort of leads or centers us in a sort of a traumatic experience, or conversely, also celebratory, right? Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that in the moments at which both sort of personal level and professional level, we call forth the sound of the pipes.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the tartan, because I think, again, from the perspective of somebody who isn't a member of the band, isn't a performing musician by any stretch, when I see the tartan, I associate it so specifically with pipe bands, and I just want to share a little bit of the history as we understand it, and then maybe invite you to reflect on sort of that, what the tartan means to the band today. Okay, so from 1922 to 1972, the Guelph Pipe Band wore the Royal Stuart tartan, and in the early years, members of the 48th Highlanders of Toronto wearing the Davidson tartan performed with the band. So we see that in the history, sort of the photographic history. On the band's 50th anniversary in 72, the band adopted the Ancient Scot tartan. And then since 1985, the band has worn the McCrae tartan in honor of Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, and the relationship with the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 234, here in Guelph. So I wondered if we could spend some time talking about the meaning of the tartans to the piping community locally here in Guelph.
The significance depends on the pipe band itself. You spoke of the 48th Highlanders.
Yeah.
Well, in 1891, when the regiment was first put together, the first colonel from the Gordon Highlanders, his name was Davidson. So they had the Davidson tartan.
Yeah.
And bands will pick and choose what is significant to them. We were the McRae, obviously, because of the McRae. Before that, we had the Royal Stewart, because you said to me earlier that
When I came here, anybody were 99% of the people in the world wear the Royal Stewart.
And it's a red plaid. It's really noticeable. It's a tartan that people can pick up on. When you joined the band in 1972,
Yes.
that's the year before I joined, for the record,
For the record, yeah.
what tartan were they wearing then?
1972, when I joined the band, the first tartan I wore with the band was the Scott tartan.
Oh, you joined when they had the Scott.
They had just switched that year, I believe.
Oh, you never ever
The
wore the
closet-
Stewart.
The closet was full of the Royal Stewart,
Yeah.
but I never wore it.
Remembrance, right.
I wore the ancient Scott.
Do you remember how the ancient Scott was it Jeff and Ed's idea? How it came about?
They had made that decision before I joined, but I know that Ed married his wife Margaret.
Margaret
the name-
Scott.
and she was a Scot.
She was Scott.
That was her
So
last
there was
name.
possibly
Yeah.
a connection there. It was a different tartan than anything else played at the time. The only one I remember close to that color
Brown.
in 1974, we went to Scotland, and the Sky Pipe Band, the Glasgow Sky, were wearing a similar colored tartan. But that's the only one of the whole World Championship that looked similar.
Because it was a gray muted tartan. It was called a hunting tartan. It was the ancient hunting Scot. So that when you went into the bush to hunt grouse, you kind of blended in with the bushes.
Yeah.
So we had a band
Yeah.
that blended in with the bushes.
But
We really liked that
But
tartan.
stood out on the competition.
it stood out in all the
Yes.
in
Yeah.
any
It was absolutely unique.
any mass
Yeah.
band arena, the ancient Scot stood out at the time.
I think it's so interesting that
That's the
you know
one that True's
individuals,
That's right. Yes.
yeah, individuals in the band who have personal connection, maybe family name connection, or they're trying to sort of locate the significance or the relevance of the specific tartan in that personal experience, right? So oftentimes those of us outside of the band, we think about, we see it as the performance of the whole. I'll just speak again from that place. The tartan for me is such a signifier. It's the symbol. It's the first thing you see. You hear the pipes and drums, and then you see the tartan. And those relationships have sort of been upheld. But it's so interesting to me that there's actually sort of really personal and humble reasons why a particular tartan might be associated with a particular local band, and that's
A
fascinating.
lot of the bands today,
Yeah.
the newer bands today, they're applying for their own tartan, and they've got to send
Okay.
a pattern, and they apply for it, and it's given to them through Scotland.
So, after the Second World War, the Guelph Pipe Band competed in the Ontario Highland Games circuit under Pipe Major Bob Whittle. Bob's already been called forth in some of our earlier discussions, so I know he's top of mind for us today as we chat about the history of the band. Can you tell me about Bob Whittle's legacy and leadership of the band?
He was a pipe major when I arrived, and then these other guys, they know some of the other things about him as well. So
Yeah. I do remember some of the band meetings in the 70s. Bob was, I believe, the president of the pipe band.
Bob Whittle.
Yeah, Bob Whittle.
Allen.
Yeah, Bob Whittle was the president of the pipe band. Doug Lee was
quartermaster.
That's right.
quartermaster.
He was
That's
the
correct. Yeah,
quartermaster.
he was quartermaster.
Yes.
What I mostly remember about Bob is after the band had some rough years in the 80s when we lost a lot of members and almost folded.
Yeah.
It was very close to a failure. In 1985, Bob came to me and contacted me and said, I'd like to get the band going again.
It never really quit.
It never really
But it was a
quit, but they-
skeleton band.
Yeah,
it was like
skeleton
3 or 4
band.
pipers, a snare drummer.
Yeah, there was almost nothing left.
Yeah.
And Bob approached me and said, I'd like to get the band going. Doug Lee will play with us. Stu Rennie, Bob Allen. These were members from the 50s and 60s that were going to come back and play just to get the band going.
Do parades.
Do parades.
Yep.
That's why we were doing parades. Bob was a big driver to get this moving between him and Doug Lee. What came of that, what stemmed of that, was a teaching program. We started teaching a lot of not just young players, but middle-aged players. Some good players came from that.
Prior to that, Bruce, so before that, we had the teaching program where Bob Whittle was instrumental in that. We bought a hut.
Paler Brothers Junkyard.
We bought a hut from the Basiri Siri. When they were building Basiri Siri, the maintenance hut was a 2-story shack. It was about 35 feet long, 12 feet wide, and 2 stories high. We bought it, we trucked it over, and we put it in Paler's Auto wrecking yard, and we set up the band hut. It was called the band hut, and Bill Paler built a fence around to keep his dogs away from us.
Lonesome
And that's
dog.
where we practiced. And we practiced there for years, and then we started the kids program. That's where Larry Willis came in,
Yep.
and Steve Harris, and all these kids came in, and well, we've got pictures in there of us. And that was mainly Bob Whittle's. He did that whole thing. He started.
You had
that was
band
in the
camps.
60s.
He started that. Eh?
You had band camps.
Yeah, we used to go to the camp. The kids were taught how to march, how to come out of their and stand attention at their hut. You get their hut would be checked.
Disciplined.
This was all the discipline coming from the guys that were in the army, Doug Lee and them guys
Yeah.
that actually were in the army, and they were, as well as being taught how to play the bagpipes and the drums and everything. And then we brought in, they were instrumental in bringing in teachers from the bigger bands, better bands. We had some of the top players come up and stay the weekend and teach with us. So
Amazing.
that was all Bob Whittle's doing. He was instrumental in the whole thing.
Sort of
I
instilling a
was
sense
part
of
of that.
mentorship.
And that's
right,
the year
within
we
band.
went to
Yeah.
Scotland, 1968.
Yeah.
We went to Scotland, and it was all mostly kids.
What it comes back to, I think, is that Bob played a big part in rejuvenating the band, both in the 60s
Yeah.
and in the 80s.
Let's spend a bit of time in the 70s because that was a real pinnacle in the band's history. So the band won in the 1976 North American Championships, Grade 1, led by Ed Nye. In 1977, they became the first Canadian band to give a radio recital on the BBC. 78, the band recorded a vinyl album. And really throughout the 70s, they also sort of implemented, as I understand it, for the first time, the use of the electronic tuner in the band's operation to adjust the pipe drones. New technology at the time that would soon revolutionize modern pipe bands, and I think is still in use today. Why was this period in the band's history so innovative and synergizing, do you think?
I think we have to thank Ed for most of it. His creativity and thinking outside the box and everything that he did.
Ed used to think outside the box, yeah.
all the time.
Great,
Yeah.
good teacher, and he was always thinking outside the box. There's no doubt about that.
Kind of a sense of anything's possible.
Well, the creation
can
of a
do-
medley contest was relatively new.
Okay.
And Ed put things together, and it wasn't just a march, dress, band, reel, which was what our traditional competition was about.
Yeah.
This consisted of an introductory march, slow marches, rigs, reels, jigs, hornpipes, everything put together.
For a certain length of time.
Yes, within a
time limit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And Ed had some very interesting ideas of how to piece this together. Bruce could
Yeah,
speak
the
to it because he had to
medleys.
learn the music.
Yes, he wrote some great medleys, or combined some great medleys with transitions between them, the tunes. But I also think he looked outside the box of the pipe band circuit. He would see somebody tuning a guitar or a piano with a meter, and said, "Why aren't we doing this?" I think he just listened to it and paid attention to things outside the closed-minded box that pipe bands have been living in. You know, no woman can play in this band. that sort of attitude was still
Yeah.
going.
It didn't exist with Ed. Anybody that
Yeah.
could play and was interested in
Yeah.
playing was in the band.
He was interested in the musicianship.
Everybody,
Yeah,
yes,
didn't
absolutely.
matter.
And
who you
in
were.
just
Yeah.
increasing, looking for ways to make
Yeah.
it easier for people to play bagpipes. And easier for him to get the people to play bagpipes together at the same time in tune.
Right.
So
And that chord,
he did several things, like the bagpipe tuner, water traps,
that's right, moisture traps in the bag.
moisture traps,
Chowder caps for the reeds.
taking the reeds out and capping the reeds.
Doug Lee made the first one that was ever made,
Yeah.
thanks to Ed's
Amazing.
idea.
And Tyler,
We didn't
I know,
tell that story in the exhibition.
I just thought about it.
I know you're aware that he modified the drone stocks in his bagpipe
Yeah.
for easier starting. So he was looking for ways to make bagpipes easier to play.
Okay. But without sacrificing the potential of what you could achieve in the music itself, in the
Exactly.
performance.
And
Yeah.
actually improving the music, trying to, like, harmonies were not common at the time. We started playing harmonies in our medleys.
So my understanding is that in the circuit, this, using the tuner, for example, was sort of, people didn't embrace it immediately. There was
Oh,
some
heavens, no.
resistance to that. Yeah,
Well, it was the size of a dictionary.
yeah, yeah.
Not like today where you can put it the size of a cell phone.
Yeah.
But it was a
Digital
giant,
today, I
and
presume. Yeah.
there was different keys
You had a sore arm holding it up.
you could switch it to. What
Yeah.
do you recall?
I was
Was it just
never
set
tall
to
enough
one?
to hold
It was a
it up.
piano tuner, wasn't it? Wasn't it a piano tuner?
Yeah, it was.
meant to tune a piano.
It was like a piano.
And there was
Yeah.
one key, was it B flat or something Ed could
But
set it
I
at?
believe somebody had,
And that's how he set the drones?
no, I believe it was created, it had been modified
Oh.
to the pitch of the bagpipe.
People used to laugh at Ed would send somebody around our band to tune the drones. And people were, what in that expletives are they doing? They trying
But
to
there
do
was
with
a
it?
lot
Didn't
of-
laugh. They said, "What the heck is
A
that?"
lot of it was, I think a lot of it at the time, when we started with the tuner, was, he has no lugs, he has no
Yeah.
lugs, he can't hear. That's why he's using the machine. He needs a machine, because he can't hear.
That first tuner was a piano tuner.
It was.
Like a handheld
Yeah.
piano tuner that
That-
was portable enough that you could take around. And,
Yeah.
It was the size of a walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
It was
And you
big.
would you would preset the frequency, you'd look for the frequency.
Wasn't there was talk in the Scottish Piper Society, like in the RSPBA, about whether or not that was going to be allowed? Like,
That's
didn't
right,
you
yeah,
go over and play
Okay.
when did you go? 77, 76?
74, 77,
Yeah.
and 81.
So, did you have the tuning meter in 74, or was it 77 when you went
I
over?
believe it would have been
Was it
77.
70? We didn't have it in 74?
I don't believe we did.
And
Okay.
wasn't that was like quite a stir
Yeah.
to have a top grade band using a
Competing.
machine to tune the instruments, and then
Imagine.
there was debate in the Piper Society in Scotland whether or not that was going to continue to be allowed
Yeah.
in competition.
And-
Now no band in the world
Think about going without one.
tunes up without a meter. Like everyone uses it, and there's all sorts of different meters created. There's even like tuning companies like Peterson who make strobe tuners for like high-end tuning for guitars and pianos and things. They have incorporated specific bagpipe settings into their tuning meters because there's such a demand
There's
for
a market
it. So,
for it.
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's keep talking along those lines and sort of move into the 80s. So you had already mentioned, I think, John, it was you said that in 81 the band won again the North American Championships, and that time under pipe major Jim McGilvray, who used a set of borrowed chanters from competition rivals Clan McFarland.
Yeah, that's still talked about today.
Yeah. We put that in
From
the
the
show.
older members.
Yeah. The band also featured female players in both pipe and drum sections, including Margaret Blair Von Dongen, Marilyn Martin Willis, Melanie McGilvray, Ellen Mole, Heather Roberts, and Teresa Weston, among others, I assume too. So when and why did female players start performing with the band?
So again, with what Ed has done, because everyone was welcome. If you could play the instrument, it didn't matter. You were in. Now, can you speak? Kenny Eller's wife played in the Guelph Pipe Band.
I understand she was in for a short time. I don't
Kenny
know
was the
when
pipe
she was at
major of a
university.
competitive band, the Clan
She was at
McFarland.
university.
Yeah.
But his wife played in Guelph at the
Played
same time.
Guelph,
Oh,
yeah. She did, yeah.
complex marital relationship. Yeah. Oh.
Our
Maybe
band,
you can speak for it. Before Ed joined the band, was there any females in the band?
not to my knowledge, no.
So there wasn't any before Ed took over pipe band.
Right.
There were females in the band in the 60s, but it was one of the first mixed bands.
One of the first mixed bands. Of course, today the band is really interestingly diverse. Lots of people from lots of places around the world, and of course, with I don't know what the current numbers are, but observationally, I'll say there's a lot of male and female members of the band playing together today. Tyler, as current pipe major, how are you thinking about and building the diversity of the pipe band community?
I think the same kind of mentality that Ed had, and that so many, well, all pipe bands today have, is that piping is for everybody. You don't need to have a Scottish background. You don't need to have a special affinity towards Scotland or Scottish culture to have an appreciation for the music, the intricacies of the instrument, and the challenge of the instrument. I think it is one of the more difficult instruments in the world, so I think a lot of people kind of like that challenge that it presents. And I mean, for us, we're seeing so many more players coming into the band that don't have a Scottish background and don't have anyone else in their family that played in pipe bands. So we have a strong relationship over the last probably 10 plus years with the Guelph Air Cadet Squadron, and the Air Cadets and all cadet squadrons are kind of recruiting from all walks of life and backgrounds, and kids join that program as kind of an extracurricular thing, and then they see, my squadron has a pipe band, it has a music program, and I'm interested in joining that and playing drums or playing pipes. And so we're seeing a lot more diversity, and I am starting to feel like, maybe not that I'm in the minority in the band, but certainly there are a large number of members of the band who are either first generation pipers or have no Scottish background whatsoever. So I was interested to learn from Ed that Ed and Jeff Nye had no Scottish background. No one else in the family played, and it was just that they saw the local Stratford pipe band where they grew up, and they wanted to play pipes. I think Jeff learned first, and Ed didn't want to be left out, so he bugged his parents until he was allowed
As
to play
brothers
pipes.
do.
But there was
Pennsylvania Dutch or something?
Yeah. So there was no Scottish background or that kind of thing. But again, it was like it was a group within the community that they could become involved with, and I think that appeals to a lot of people, that being a part of something bigger than yourself, the challenge of the instrument, and the community part of playing music with other people is really appealing. So I think it doesn't matter whether or not you're Scottish; those elements are appealing to so many.
So let's move sort of from the 80s into the 90s, and the band continued under pipe majors Bruce Anderson and Bruce McDonald. The band focused on community events, returning to competition in the early 2000s, and then in 2003 won the Pipers and Pipe Band Society of Ontario's Champion Supreme Grade 4. So Bruce, I'd love to hear from you. Why was it important for the band in this period to focus on community events?
At the time, we were trying to rebuild. We didn't have a lot of members, and I became involved actually with the Air Cadets in Kitchener. I believe it was 80 Wing. I was teaching there. I did manage to get 3 players through that group for a short time, and then they went on to university. We were teaching people at the Legion in Guelph, and managed to create a nucleus of players and recruited some through the university. Again, people that were just starting, just beginning and learning. We continued doing the community events because it was it gave us something to participate in, to create, and gave the people a purpose for playing. We did play some contests through that time. They weren't the society sanctions contests. They were Aurelia. We played at the Aurelia Festival.
Well, and even London.
Scottish Festival.
We played at London Kiwanis Festival.
Yeah.
We played, we made 2 field trips, one to Florida
Oh, yes.
Florida.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember
On
what
the
year
beach.
that was exactly.
You were playing bass, right?
And we also did a trip to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carlton, Kentucky.
We played there as well in the competition. Did well in both places, by the way,
Yeah.
against American bands. I think we won every contest we entered. I believe we won because I think we were playing at a level above the other bands. It wasn't right that we entered these contests, but we didn't have enough members to compete in the pipe band circuit
Right.
In Ontario.
in Ontario.
And the competition experience, regardless of how you're placing, is an important aspect.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Good
Yeah.
point.
So
Yeah.
I won't say we didn't just focus on community events. We focused on building the band. And the way to build the band was teaching, exposure, and some purpose. You needed a purpose at the time.
Would you like to talk about Bruce McDonald and his impact on the band in that same period?
In the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, in the 80s.
And the 90s, yeah.
And the
70s.
Yeah.
Bruce McDonald was an active, inactive member of the band for decades. His job forced him to travel all over Canada. He played in a multitude of bands. Every time he would relocate, he would join the band and improve the band.
Yeah.
He
Played in the
was a good
band
player.
in 1968 in Scotland.
Yeah,
He was on his honeymoon.
Oh,
And he's
I never knew that.
Played in the band in Scotland with us in '68,
yeah.
and he was on his honeymoon.
I think the 70s was the only time I
With the
didn't play
Guelph
with him in
Pipe
the
Band.
band.
Yeah.
80s, 90s,
He did.
2000s.
Stayed
Yeah.
He
He
played,
stayed
he
in
played
my
with us
hometown.
in the 70s, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because he
Oh,
would,
you're right.
because he would give me,
Yes,
he
he
gave
did.
me a ride home from practice
Yes.
several times.
So I played with him in every decade.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And he came back in the 80s when he retired. He played under me for a few years. And then I stepped back and let him take the leadership because he was far superior to me at what he was doing in the teaching program.
He put us
Interesting.
into a grade 4 and said, we need to go back into competition, serious competition. And he put a grade 4 band together, and I have to, because of my gray matter, I have to look to you. When you were a snare drummer, Bruce was our pipe major, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so 2000 and what did we win Champion Supreme?
2003, we won Champions
Yes, it
Supreme.
would have been
Okay.
about 2001. He took 2000
I think it was, yeah.
2000 or 2001. He took over as pipe major
Yeah.
and built it
To a
up
competition
up
band.
to-
So since 2007, the Guelph Pipe Band has partnered with the Guelph Air Cadet Pipe Band, bringing several players from scratch to grade 1 solo competition status. The band also developed the Spirit of Ontario Pipes and Drums, which began in 2018 and gives newer players competition experience. I'm interested in all of your perspectives, but I'd like to start with you, Tyler. Why is the band focused on partnership?
I think partnerships of those kinds are important, again, because it's sort of reaching out to a larger demographic. And certainly through the Air Cadets, like I mentioned earlier, like they're recruiting in the community. It's kind of an extracurricular thing, and they're doing the work of sort of getting youth involved in this program, and then they are supporting having a teaching program for pipes and drums as well. So for us, we've seen a great partnership between us and the Air Cadets, where we've been able to filter a lot of members from that piping program into the Guelph Pipe Band. It's also about just teaching and giving players a skill set so that wherever they go, they can join a band. I know, like Bruce, you mentioned earlier about Bruce McDonald. Whenever he relocated for work, he would find a pipe band. I think with piping and drumming, we see a lot of that. So the idea is giving the kids, the youth, that skill set that wherever they end up, if they go off to university somewhere else, they can join a band, as well as feeding that next generation of players in the Guelph Pipe Band. So for us, like with the Air Cadets, that's kind of been an important aspect of it, and they do a lot of the kind of initial recruiting and getting kids interested, and then always having kind of a pool of kids to work with, piping and drumming wise.
Yeah.
With Spirit of Ontario, and I know Bruce can talk more about this as well because he's been heavily involved in getting that started. But the idea for that was when the Guelph Band, we got to a point competition-wise where we had a grade 3 band, so the higher level contest band, and a grade 4 band, but we didn't have an entry-level grade 5 band at the time. So we had some student learners, both adults and kids, from various organizations. I do a bunch of teaching, and other members in the band also do teaching. Dylan teaching in Waterloo, Barry McKendry and his band with St. Andrews in Mississauga, so doing teaching out there. And we wanted an avenue where students from different locales, not just within Guelph, could gain some competition experience. And I think, Bruce, you put it well earlier where you talked about the band getting back into competition in the early 2000s and giving some purpose to what we're doing. And even when we weren't a full competition band, having a few contests that we would go and play at in Aurelia or those band trips. I think nothing motivates better than having a performance or a high-level thing coming up to improve the band. So
the benefit of the connection with other groups is you have more ability to teach rather than just play. When a competition idiom, the pipe band practices, it doesn't teach.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You spend more time finessing things than you do keeping people, programming people, not programming.
Yeah, we are programmed.
Providing people with the ability to think for themselves and to see,
It's really
feel
two
the
parts
music,
of a whole, right?
feel the music.
Yeah.
When you're trying to get a group consensus, you are programming.
And logic would say that if you are creating a space that feels comfortable and familiar and exciting and interesting, and you're with people that you both care about, and you're doing the thing that you collectively care about together, you're going to bring all of that into your competition mindset as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's so interesting to me to think about sort of the circle of community and the competition circuit sort of intersecting sort of really across the entire history of the band. And maybe that's just part of pipe bands in general. That's the way that they evolve and operate. Certainly in the case of the Guelph Pipe Band. But given that you have such healthy collaboration and sort of sharing of space and opportunity with other bands that you've so liberally given voice to today, I think it's interesting that's unchanged. Like you're still doing that work, and it's still the thing that keeps the band lively and interesting.
A lot to do with it too. If you look at other bands, say brass bands, they read the music.
In front of them.
In front of
all the time.
them. Pipers and drummers, it's memory.
You have to
They've got to
memorize.
memorize everything.
We don't march with
You
music.
don't march
Yeah.
with music.
We with
How-
music. So every piece that we've
Every
learned.
piece is in your noggin.
Yeah.
Every bit.
Okay.
These guys the pipers are phenomenal. Like
Hundreds of tunes memorized
the
in their heads.
pipers
Hundreds.
Wow.
pipers are actually phenomenal. With their, like you just say, well, what's this tune? And all of a sudden they'll hum it and then they'll play it.
That's actually
And
that's something that's been noticeable over the last 50 years is the change in repertoire. You go from band to band to band now, they don't play the same thing.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, 60s, they all played the same tunes.
Well, there's still a lot of them playing Lord Alexander Kennedy.
There's
But like
been
original competition or compositions are
yeah,
written.
the original, like, there are players now who, when you play Bonnie Dundee, Road to the Isles, the old tunes, they don't know them.
No, they don't. No.
Okay, so we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Guelph Pipe Band. I'm thinking, as I'm sure you all are, about what's next for the band, and possibly even what is the story of piping in Guelph 100 years from now. So I'd like to sort of talk about what you see as next steps, what's happening sort of soonest. I'm looking to you, Tyler, as pipe major.
It's been a big year with the 100th anniversary, so it was a lot of things that came to fruition that were in the planning for many years, and then of course, with COVID and everything, but luckily we kind of came out of that in time to still be able to celebrate the 100th anniversary, and moving forward, kind of building on those successes. Competitively, the band is continuing to move in an upward trajectory. We've just brought in some new leadership in the drum corps that we think is going to be really great for the band. So, looking at kind of climbing up the ladder of competition grades, as well as still supporting, what we would call our feeder bands. So we have a grade 3 band currently, looking to move into grade 2, the next level in the next couple years. And then we have a grade 4 band. We also still have the Spirit of Ontario band and the Air Cadets, et cetera. So kind of having a venue for students to kind of come up through the ranks and go as far as they'd like to with the music. Keeping up the community involvement. It's been the first time in several years that we've been out doing Santa Claus parades again, and finally, it was great for the 100th anniversary of the band to be able to do the full Remembrance Day parade and service at the Sleeman Center again. That was a much more kind of quiet, intimate service the last couple years, where we'd had something here at McRae House or a small service at the Cenotaph, but to be able to get out with the whole band on parade and everybody at the Sleeman Center was really great. So continuing that kind of mix of community involvement as well as, pursuit of musical excellence. Mm-hmm. And I think, especially with the 100th anniversary, kind of has given me time to stop and think about, what is it to be a member of the Guelph Pipe Band? What is it to be a member of the leadership team, someone kind of in charge of steering that band in a direction, and really being sort of a custodian of the history of the organization. It's in our hands right now what we do with the band in order to try to set it up to continue to exist after we're gone. So I think moving the band forward, it's very much in my mind to try and set things up so that it can be taken up by the next generation and that the band can continue to thrive and progress for the next 100 years.
As to the future of the Guelph Pipe Band, yes, it will be around. I say we will go because we follow the innovation.
Yeah, and been quite fortunate to start as a community band and still end up where we are today.
Yeah.
Still on the map.
I was going to say, community is so central to
And
all
not just
that the
on the
band is
map,
doing.
but one of the largest pipe bands.
Yeah.
When we put our feeder bands and our grade 3, 4, and 5, everybody together, we're a mass band. And we're under one organization.
So you're here to stay.
So maybe it's our fault we're stealing some players from other little towns.
Well, we'll excitedly watch for what's next. Where can we find the next, where will the band perform next locally here in Guelph? Do you know, Tyler?
Our Robbie Burns night is back on in person on the 21st, I think, that Saturday of January.
January 21st.
That's at the Rockmosa Community Center in Rockwood, actually, so not too far. Another small community.
Tickets available now, or?
Tickets will be available now,
Awesome.
when this airs, tickets will be up available online. And we've got an in-person night of entertainment and dancing and all sorts of things. It's a big fundraiser for the band, so that's kind of our next big thing. And then after that, we're working towards the next competition season, which kicks off in June. So. And it runs until the middle of August, so we'll be looking forward to getting back out on the competition field and playing all over Ontario and taking that next step.
Well, hopefully we've inspired some new avid listeners and fans of the band. Certainly, I know we're going to reach a lot of folks with this conversation. And I'll just remind everybody, too, that the exhibition continues at the Guelph Civic Museum until January 15th. So if history is your beat and you want to learn a little bit more about the band over and above today's conversation, you'll find that there at the museum. And just want to thank you all for this conversation and spending so much time together over the last year.
It's been our pleasure. Thanks,
Our
Don.
pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take good care.